This is the Math Map Book Club, where ordinary parents encourage one another to develop an extraordinary appreciation of math. We love what we know and struggle over the unfamiliar. Through weekly conversation and exploration among friends, we can begin to enjoy ideas that seem difficult. Join our book club as we discover how math helps us to know God and to make Him known.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Math Map Book Club. I am going to share the slides. It is October the 15th. We're halfway, well, just under halfway through the month. Tomorrow would be our median day of the month, right? So if we were to be really thinking about halfway points, we could think of tomorrow as the median of our month. In September, we would have had to have averaged our middle 2 days, the 14th and the 15th, right? And the median would have been 14 and a half. But in October, the median is the 16th of the month. So just a little bit of fun math that you could play with your students if you wanted to practice mean, median, and mode. That would be fun too, to think about how you could think about the mode of the month. Since every day is unique, how could you think about the mode? Anyway, so there's a question for you all to ponder. How could you practice mode by using dates? But this week, we're not talking about mean, median, and mode. We're actually talking about polygons from lesson 12. And as we do every week, we start off our conversation by talking about different strategies for using flashcards. And the strategy that I have for you this week is going back, and again, we're kind of going back and revisiting these different strategies, is the idea of incorporating flashcards throughout the day. So if you have students, perhaps even students who resist sitting down and drilling flashcards, there is a character development that we do what we're told, but we can also spread that practice time out throughout the day. And a couple of ideas for how you could do that is you could use that as an entrance ticket, right? So, hey, before you sit down to eat, you have to get one of our flashcards correct. Or before you can get in the van to go to wherever, you've got to answer a flashcard. So answering flashcards could become your entrance ticket to different activities throughout your day, or you could collect them as rewards. So just randomly throughout your day or on a predetermined schedule, you could ask your student the flashcards, and then they get to keep the ones that they got right. And at the end of the day, right, perhaps you have a goal that if they got 15 correct flashcards, right, they get chocolate sauce on their ice cream, or right. I'm trying to, for myself, not always use food rewards, but they do tend to be effective. So coming up with something that your student wants, right? Maybe you limit their electronics time and they can get an extra 10 minutes, right? If they've collected enough flashcards, right? And so making that a high enough goal that they have to kind of work towards it is a way that you could incentivize doing those flashcards, and spreading it out throughout the day then just reduces that. If they have any sort of resistance to sitting down and practicing flashcards, it becomes just a part of life. Any ideas or thoughts on flashcards?
I really love that idea, Kirsty. Thank you for sharing it. I was going to say, I don't know if anybody else gets a little bit like unsure of how to handle the fact that there are 2 facts on every card. I don't know. We went through our deck and and I know the sides actually do look different. It says classical conversations on one side and then whatever the theme of the deck is on the other. But that doesn't work real well for me to keep them straight. So we went through and put a blue Sharpie on a dot on the one side of each of the cards and a red Sharpie on all the others. And so I've been trying to like, okay, today we're doing reds and another day we do blues. And that way I know it's just my perfectionism, whatever, which I don't have much of except in really like certain areas. But I want to get to all of them and I don't want to miss any. And anyway, so.
All right, we're gonna have to go back to Jana's, flashcard practice box now and like add a category like red and blue. That's a good idea. If that logo is not enough of a reminder, and isn't it funny how for a lot of us it's grayed out and so you don't notice it, but yet a little colored dot would make a lot of difference. All right. So also on day one at home, we encourage you to have a conversation about the cover. And so this week we're practicing our canons of rhetoric. And we know that our canon of memoria, we practice that with our core habits, right? They're the core habits of memoria. That's our naming, attending, memorizing, expressing, and storytelling. So we've talked about those specifically. So here, I would just encourage you to think broadly. You could go back and pull some of those core habits out to practice if you were really looking to practice memoria on any particular week. But it's also okay to ask your students, what do you remember? What's familiar, right? And so we're really taking a look at this familiar and unfamiliar flow throughout all of CC. And it stems from the idea that we as adults tend to look at grammar and say it's either hard or it's easy. But grammar is inherently neither hard nor easy. It's either familiar or unfamiliar, right? If I know my math facts because my computation facts for addition, because I've used them for 40 years, then they feel easy, right? If I've never seen them before, they feel hard. So instead of using those terms hard and easy, we're trying to encourage our families to use the idea of familiar or unfamiliar, because the simple way to go from unfamiliar to familiar is to practice. And so helping our students to start to evaluate grammar as, oh, this is familiar to me or this is unfamiliar to me, changes the narrative from, oh, well, that's really hard, right? Now, developing understanding that may be harder for some things than others. So I don't want to say that we can never use hard and easy, but when we're talking about developing our memoria, when we're talking about memorization, it's a lot more friendly to our students and a lot more encouraging to them to believe that they can learn by saying this is unfamiliar because we haven't practiced it enough. So when we're looking at our covers, ask them, what's familiar? What's not familiar? What should we practice more if it's unfamiliar? Have that conversation, and that's a great way to go back and key in on their memoria, right, and what they remember. Likewise, we know that our common topics are the common topics of invention. So if you want to practice invention with your students, you can ask them common topic questions. But we also know that invention has that broader sense of something that's created. And so inviting your students to create something that's related to the topic or to the art. This week is a great example of a week where you could say, what could you create using polygons? Or let's go and cut out some snowflakes, right, to create snowflakes together. So this is a great week where you could talk about, right, creating something new that's related to this topic or this art. Thinking through our canons of rhetoric are probably the only times we're going to specifically look at arrangement, elocution, and delivery. And so it's a great opportunity to take some time and review the arrangement of the cover, which we've talked about, or the arrangement of the booklet. At this point in the year, we're probably starting to feel pretty familiar with the booklet and taking a step back and saying, let's just go through and remember all of the different ways that we can use this booklet. What comes first? What's at the end of the booklet? Are there parts of the booklet that we have maybe been overlooking? And so thinking about the arrangement of the booklet and why the booklets are arranged the way they are may be a helpful reminder both to us as parents and to our students. Reading the quotation and reflection together It may have become easy at home to focus our conversation on the art. And so this is a great time when we're thinking about elocution or style to go and read the quotation and the reflection, and then talk about whether or not you think they're effective. Do they match? Do they tell you something and make you think? How do the elements of style or elocution perhaps help to increase their effectiveness? And then think about the booklets and their delivery. A lot of times when we think about how things are delivered, we're talking about our own delivery. Are we speaking too fast? Are we speaking too slow? Are we drawing our audience in? But there's other ways that we can think about delivery. And the way that your student receives their booklets each week, right? How does that maybe change, right? How is that impacted by how they're being delivered to them, right? Do you get excited every week when you go, okay, we're gonna get a new booklet out. Here you go. Or do you go, okay, everybody, let's go find your book. Where is it? Right? Where's your book? You can see, right? There's a totally different reception, whether they're delivered with some excitement over something new or some dread over something new. And so we can think about how the booklets are being delivered to our students, and then that might change how they receive them.
Kirsty, your discussion about reading the quotation and reflection made me think about we had a question last week. I think some people think that the contribution to the conversation is the reflection. And so just pointing people back that there is a reflection on the cover, but the contribution is just more of how do we fit all these things together, right? How do we see God? How do we see math? All and the title, what the topic that we're talking about this week. Because I think that it hasn't only been one person, but several people have said, because we say read the reflection and they think we mean read the whole contribution to the conversation to their kid, and we don't want them to do that. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, thanks, Babs. That's a great clarification, because no, we're just meaning these two pieces. On the left is a quotation that we tried to pull largely from authors. Sometimes they came from other places. Sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to find a quotation that matches well. But the left-hand side that is not italicized, that is the quotation. On the right-hand side is a reflection. Initially, Lee's goal was to have all of these be a scholar's prayer that would be on the cover. We recognized that while a lot of them are Christian prayers, sometimes they maybe were from authors who weren't Christian or perhaps came from different places. And so we decided instead to say this is a reflection. And this reflection is intended to encourage you to think about how you would pray a scholar's prayer that may be related to this concept. And so we went with that broader term of reflection to be a little bit more inclusive of who we chose and what we chose to put in that space there. But yes, that is the reflection. And as Babs just pointed out, that contribution to the conversation is just one person's thoughts as to how you could tie all of those pieces together. Right. And what we want eventually is for every parent and every student to feel like they can write their own contribution to the conversation. So that's your goal. That's what we're going to see our challenge for students doing in transcendentals, is really being encouraged to write their own contribution to the conversation. How do you make sense of all of these pieces and pull out truth, beauty, and goodness? And
Another thing I was thinking about when you were talking about hard and easy is, so I've been in CC for probably 15 years, and probably the last 5 is where I actually understood the classical method. I mean, I had been in it for a long time, really for like community and accountability. And then I think I finally understood the classical model and how to teach classically. And then I was thinking, well, the last 5 years I've been in the math map. And I think the math map kind of forced me into teaching classically. And what it's done is made the other strands easier to use this classical model because we can do the same things, talking about the unfamiliar and the familiar. Just like in class, it's easier for me to do that with all my other strands with my Challenge A kids, because I had to do it with the math map. And so I don't know, it just kind of clicked to me when you were talking about easy and hard, that I feel like this is now easy. Whereas some people, if teaching classically is brand new, it is going to be hard. And so it's going to be that repetition and doing it over and over again that's going to get us to the place where we feel more comfortable doing it. And it might not be that first year. And that's what we have to encourage a lot of parents to just keep going.
So Babs, I think you need to like take your own testimony there and cut it out and post that on Facebook, because that was really, really well said. And I think we probably would all agree, right? Every week that I sit down and I think about how do I pull the core habits and the canons of rhetoric and the common topics in, every week as I'm thinking about that, I'm finding that I'm understanding that better. It's becoming more familiar to me, right? So none of us are masters of this. We're all working through what does this look like, because that's what it means to grow. So thank you. So also on day one, we take that time to check off where we are. So polygons, and to remember, it's a great time to remind our students what dimension are we in. We're in 2D. So a lot of what we're looking at geometrically, because geometry is done in the plane. It's that idea of shapes and measurement. And so even though we may be looking at things numerically or algebraically, we're really looking at integrating that in with that geometric view, where we're seeing the graphs and the shapes and the images that go along with those numbers. And then just a reminder, because I haven't said this in a while, this over here is the outline for at home that we recommend for at home. It reflects what is in the challenge guide for students to do at home, and really is there to help families remember the order. And that is what our book club goes through. So we've had some feedback on the book club. One, people say it's long, and I know that it is, but we really encourage you to fast forward through it if need be. But we also want to give you not a didactic understanding of the concepts. That's not what we're trying to do. We are not here to teach you the math. We are here to encourage you how to ask questions, how to teach classically. And as Babs just said, that takes a long time to develop. And so I did see some feedback that all we did was really tell you how to ask good questions. And that's kind of the point of what we're doing. So we're happy at the end of the book club to answer any math questions that you have. So please feel free to bring those or send those in. I know a lot of you are watching this recorded, and I really want you to feel welcome to send in those math questions and to provide that sort of didactic explanation for you as a parent. But the goal of the book club is not to teach didactically or to give you a video lesson on the math of the week, but to really encourage you how you can be using the booklet and the classical method at home.
So question, oh, go ahead, Yatin.
Are you sure?
Mhm.
Okay. So we wanted to do this one room schoolhouse idea. So we have 3 kids at home. And so I have a challenge A, and then the tutor is going through the first 2 eye pages with him and the front cover arts with him. So on Wednesday, so community day is on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday when I pull all of them together, my son is like, "Oh, but my challenge A tutor have done this already. Do I have to sit here? Can I go do my stuff?" So there's this natural tendency of, call it preaching independence or call it something else, but he just wants to veer off and go ahead to the corner and do his own thing because it's faster. He didn't want to wait. And so I understand there's hard training there. But at the same time, some of the questions from my customers is also that if I have 5 kids sitting at a dinner table, the mom is inundated with all kinds of questions. I mean, I can help one student one-on-one in guiding him the 5 common topics, but then it's 5 times 5, when you're trying to guide all 5 questions. So do you have any hacks or tips, or how do you actually gather everybody together at the same table and encourage this conversation without it being 25 common topics?
Well, and that's where I would say just pick 1 or 2, right? Don't try to do all 5 every week. That I would just say, hey, this week there's 15 skills of learning. You could practice, well, over the 2 pages, right? We have the common topics, we have 5 and then 5. That we made the core habits on the memoria, the common topics on the invention page. And I would just say each week, just go through the next one, kind of like we do here on the book club. And you might say, okay, we're going to spend 5 weeks on naming. We're going to spend 5 weeks on comparison. Or you might say, this week we're doing comparison, then we're going to do definition. And I would just pick one, because it's not supposed to drive your time together, those iPages. They're supposed to be quick, maybe 5 minutes. And so I would say just pick one. And if you have a student who's been in community, I mean, there's no limit to how many questions we could ask. So you could even say, okay, if you are really confident because you've been in community, I'm going to let you lead your brothers and sisters, right? You pick a common topic and you help them to figure out what they can name. You figure out what they could define, and you help them go look up the definition if they don't know it, right? And so I would say if you've got a student who's done this on community day and feels like we've got this, then say, okay, you're leading the conversation with your younger siblings. And I wouldn't try to do too much. I would just pick one. So if we're looking at the cover, maybe I might pick 1 or 2 different things that we're going to talk about each week. But again, we're trying to just practice these skills, and we don't have to do it all every week. We can just say, hey, this week we're practicing this one thing. So if I have 5 kids, I might say, okay, we're practicing naming. What does naming mean? Remember, it means we're going to use the right words. So I want everybody to open up your booklet and look at the page, and we're going to go around the table and you're going to name something. And if your sibling got it before you, well, too bad, right? Next time we'll start with you. And just have them go through, and they might be triangle, circle, right? Parallel lines, whatever it is. Or, depending on the ages of your students, maybe you do something a little bit differently, or you just read. But that's how I would do it. So it doesn't have to drive your whole math time together or become overwhelming. It's just a quick, we're practicing, we don't care about the math. Right. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek because I know everybody does care about the math, but those iPages are not there for us to look at the math concepts. As our students get older, they're going to go, well, this is a good reference. I'm going to come back and look at this. As we, as parents, are working through it, we might see them as a great reference. But the time that we spend with our children each week is intended to be practicing the skills of learning. And so I would just say pick one. Or if you really, really want to, maybe 2. But I think just picking one each week to practice on that iPage is enough, because then you're going to use the other ones on lesson pages. We're going to continue to practice the other ones. But on that iPage, I would just keep it really simple and not try to do too much.
Okay, thank you.
And just for the record, right? We on the book club right? We're doing that, right? So we're trying to model that for you. Even when I might say, hey, there's all these different things, like on the covers, we give you all the different things, not so that you do all of them, but so that you feel equipped to do any of them. But on each of our iPages, we're trying to just hone in on, let's just do one, and what does it look like to do it well? Leslie.
I just wanted to ask, because I don't have any domain earlier than complex in my home. So that little Foundations at Home assignment guide, is that actually in the on the I-1 page of the earlier domains?
Yes.
I love that. That's great to know. Thank you.
You're welcome. So with that said, let's go ahead and turn to our lesson pages. So our frame page for day one is our math map, making sure we know where we are. And then we get to our lesson pages. And so you can see there, I'm not going to read through all of our strategies for doing the lesson pages with all of our students, but just our new one this week is to challenge students to consider the topic in each dimension. Right. And so remember, we talked about how, especially in your first year or two, you may be looking for ways to tailor this for the student who finds a lot of this unfamiliar. Right. And that, since we're talking about familiar and unfamiliar, in your first couple of years, there's a lot that is unfamiliar. And so you may be tailoring or scaling to make the lesson pages more accessible to those students by doing less or using a more familiar domain, right? So that's this idea of building confidence through emphasizing some things that are familiar and de-emphasizing the things that are unfamiliar, making those more grammar work and less overwhelming. But as our students gain familiarity and they gain confidence, we can challenge those students to think about these ideas and say, okay, well, when we think about a polygon, why can't we have a polygon in one dimension? Or you could ask them, what do you remember about 3 dimensions? And where do we see polygons in 3 dimensions, right? What does that mean? Right? What might it mean in a 4th dimension, right? Where might a polygon fall in the 4th dimension, right? So we know that it's a 2-dimensional shape, but asking them to consider, what does this look like if I was to look at it in each dimension? What part of the polygon might I see in 0D or in 1D? So those are some, again, those are for those students who are becoming more familiar with the lessons and want to push to go a little bit deeper. That's one way that you could consider going a little bit deeper for those students. And also, I'm just going to say this, right? Because some of our students, they think they know it all because it's become familiar, and they see the pattern and they go, Mom, I know this. And so finding some questions like this that challenge them, right? Well, do you really? Well, then think about it this way, can help them to see maybe where they don't know or where there's more to know than they realized, right? So instead of just, this is my old classroom teacher coming out, right? I saw so many families who thought their kids were so smart and they would just push them through, right? I need my 7th grader to be in honors geometry, or I need my 8th grader to be in pre-calculus because smart kids are advanced and they're going faster. And what I saw was that those students really weren't ready for those classes because they were good at the grammar work, they were good at memorizing, but they weren't ready to integrate. And so we want to be able to find a way to meet the needs of those students who are feeling pretty confident that they've got it by either saying, okay, there's always more grammar to learn, right? You're really good at this, there's always more grammar, or to provide them ways that they can start playing around with integrating ideas without actually stepping up a whole booklet or going to the next step, right? Let's camp here, right? If you think you know there is everything there is to know about triangles, well, let's really think through what else is there to know that's maybe not in the lesson pages that you're doing. And so the dimensions are one way that we can encourage our students to think that way. And so here is our page 1 lessons. Are there any questions that you have about any of the math that's on these pages?
Is an apothegm similar to a radius?
So the apothegm is, I'm going to try and show you here, right? So here, let me see what color I've got, and then it'll show up better. Ink color, red. So here's my apothegm. My apothegm is always going to be perpendicular to the side, where my radius is going to go to a vertex. And the really nice thing about the apothegm and the radius, and then half of the side, is that we get a right triangle. And so we're going to see that that's going to open up trigonometry, the Pythagorean theorem, that it's going to help us to see things about the measure of the polygon that would be hard if that wasn't the case. So obviously that's not something we're worried about our students seeing yet, but we're going to work on defining those, and one day that your students are going to look at this and go, oh wait, that's a right triangle, right? Oh wait, I could do this. And we'll see in lesson 17, we sort of take that and integrate that idea, even though students may not recognize it right away. Any other questions? I think this is a great example of where our younger students are given a very straightforward definition of polygon. We never actually define polygon here in monomials. So there's an expectation as our students grow that they're going to be bringing that grammar with them through the different domains. Lee has tried really hard to not require a lot of bringing along, that she reviews a lot of things from earlier domains, but the reality is that it's hard to add new grammar things for students to learn without expecting that they're going to bring some of that along. So here's a great example of where they're not writing a definition of a polygon. So if you have a student who's working in monomials and perhaps doesn't have that piece of grammar, you could go and look on the chart, but here's a great example of where that working together as a family, they're going to see that definition on a narrower domain, even though they don't see it on their own. So on day 2, we switched to our I² invention page. Again, remembering that our goal here is not the math, but it is to practice the common topics. And so I am not picking common topics that necessarily go along with the pages. I'm just going through to show you how we can use these common topics with any of these pages. So in this case, we're talking about definition, and again, the familiar and the unfamiliar. So with our students who have had some exposure before, we might ask them to define familiar words from memory. So I might ask my students, for example, if we're all sitting at the table, I might ask my students to say, okay, go through and I want you to tell me something on here that you know the meaning of. Now, if I have young students who are not yet reading, they might say, well, I know that letter A, or I know that letter S, or that letter M, right? And that's okay, right? They are still using their memoria to say something that is familiar to them, right? But with students who can read, they might go through and they might say, well, I know what time is, or I know what light is, or I know what length is. And so encouraging them to pick out words that are familiar and then tell you what they mean, right? It doesn't have to be a perfect definition, but we're encouraging them to use their words to explain what a word means. Then you might say, okay, well, I want you to go find a word that's unfamiliar, and I want you to see if you can figure out what it means. Right? So they might go through and they might say, well, I don't know what candela is, but the pattern looks like it's a way to measure light, right? So there's how I've now taken an unfamiliar word. I've seen the context of the word, and I've created a definition. And if you have one student that does that, or if you as mom, as the lead learner was to do that, guess what? Now your next student might go, well, I don't know what amp is, but it's a way to measure current. And I don't know what kilogram is, but it's a way to measure mass, right? It doesn't matter that we're just using the pattern, but we see that that's a powerful pattern on a page like this. And then we might say, okay, well, let's see if there's some words that we can't figure out and see if we can go and use our resources to figure them out. So maybe I look at standard international units and I think, I don't really know, right? Standard I know and units I know. I don't know what this international part is. So maybe I go and I look on the lesson pages to see if those words have been used in a context on the lesson pages that helps me to figure them out. Or perhaps I go and I look in a chart. I think, well, where would this have been in the charts? Or I go and I look in the glossary. And hopefully the words that you look up are in the glossary. And if you find a word that's not in the glossary, please tell us so that we can add it. I'm very close to my goal for the number of words, but I'm still looking for some. So if you find a word that you're looking up and it's not in the glossary, please tell us. So you might, at standard international units might be one that you think, I'm going to go look that up in the glossary. I'm going to go see what does this really mean? And that we're helping our students then learn to use their resources to look up unfamiliar words that they can't decode from a context.
This might take a little bit more work, but I'm looking in at the lesson pages in a lower domain, a more narrow domain, because I know in the natural sometimes they have a definition and we're just tracing the definition or we're copying it or whatever. So, I mean, I know we'll probably have the naturals out there for a while, so that will be available to people. The others might not be available, right? Once we start printing them all. But I think having that to look back, that's again, it takes more work because you have to print something else. But I've just found just by looking back at some of those more narrow domains, I can find definitions. And sometimes it'll tell you how to say it, like if it's something unfamiliar, like how to say the limit equation or whatever, like vectors or whatever it is. Sometimes they'll say how you say it, and they'll even give you the words on how to say it. So using those lower domains can help too.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, I think that's where I would say that's all I would do, right? With 5 kids at the table, is I might not even get to looking up unfamiliar words, right? That might be something I might do with older students, or I, as the lead learner, may do ahead of time. But I would just say, let's go around and everybody pick out a word that you know the meaning of and tell us the meaning, right? Or for little ones, just find something that you know how to read, right? So again, the goal is not the math, the goal is to practice definition.
And then I remember in the workshop, the Math at Home workshop, we talk about pairing, divide and conquer. So pairing the older students and lead the oldest child and the 5th child and off to the side and do flashcards so that you have 3, I don't know, mom help me, instead of 5. So there are, I think, some practical strategies that would still foster that one-room schoolhouse idea, but make it attainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's it, right? You pick the pieces, right? Like maybe and every family is going to be different. So we have a lot of people who say, it'd be nice to have a script. And we keep saying, there's no script because your family is unique, right? Every single family is unique. And God gave every single family a different teacher in order to be able to tailor your instruction to your unique family. And so there is no script. But that's a great reminder that maybe the one-room schoolhouse portion for your family means that we're just talking about the cover together, and then we split off. Or, hey, yes, we are. We're gonna do this part, our cover and our iPage. We're gonna do that together. We're gonna practice these skills of learning together. We can all do that. But our lesson pages, maybe I am gonna split you up, right? And so that's okay. It doesn't mean we all have to be like holding hands and doing the same page at the same rate.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's very relieving. I think another idea is that when we were doing MathMat, when we jump from domain, like transit from one dimension to another dimension, for example, booklet 9, which is our communities on there, the format of the pages, the lesson pages changes. So it makes sense for me to sit down with the child one-on-one and just walk him or her through the format in the second dimension. And I would assume that now that I know that, oh, from 1D to 2D, it's a little transition. They need a little bit more alone mom time. Then from 2 to 3D, it's going to be that way too. So I know I'm much more prepared for what's to come.
That's a great point. Yeah. Because it's, hey, as the lead learner, I am leading my kids through the same topics, right? It doesn't mean we have to do it always together, but if I have looked at this page and I know what the international units are, then I only have to prepare really one topic for all 5 kids versus trying to answer all 5 kids' questions at the same time, right? So, and then when we do have family conversation, we're all talking about the same thing. We're all talking about polygons this week, even if we're not always doing it all at the same time, right? That as we're going through life, we can be saying, oh, well, hey, it's polygons this week. What shapes do you see? And everybody can participate in that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's so freeing. Because some of my parents will be looking at, you don't have toddlers, you don't understand what that means to have a one-room schoolhouse, because it is quite chaotic sometimes, but thank you, that was very freeing.
Yeah, I remember, so when, I don't know what I thought, but when I said I wanted to homeschool, I told my husband that when we were still engaged, and he said, sure, okay, because he figured it would be a phase and I would grow out of it by the time our kids were school aged. And I really did not know what it meant, other than I didn't want to have to get up and make lunches and get kids on the bus. Like I just, and I didn't want to share my kids. That was really my motivation. I wanted to keep my kids. I was older. I didn't want to share them and send them away. I didn't know what it looked like. I hadn't thought practically of what homeschooling looked like. And I remember the day that I went, oh, this is what it looks like to have 2 toddlers at the same time in the house all day. Like that was not I don't know what I envisioned, but it wasn't that. So yes, I remember those days of having toddlers, and yeah, you're lucky if you're just counting and doing colors with the Lego bricks. So whether you're doing pages 1 through 4 on day 1, or whether you have chosen to do common pages like 1, 5, 9, and 13 on day 1, and 2, 6, 10, and 14 on page 2, every week we're just going through pages 1 through 4. So here's page 2. Does anybody have any questions about page 2 topics? One of the things I like about this page, just a little bit of history, is you'll notice in monomials, the page has been split vertically into 2 halves. And what we're working towards here is, if you're given a triangle, we're working towards analyzing that triangle. What's all the things that I can know about that triangle if it's in the plane, or if it's in the coordinate plane. And so I like the fact that by the time your student, right, gets to expressions and transcendentals, they're going to be able to say, well, give me a triangle and I'm going to tell you everything that you can know about it. That's what this page is building towards. So I think that that's really kind of neat that you're going to see this on this page. It's also a great contrast between geometry in the plane and geometry in the coordinate plane. Lee sometimes uses the term off-grid to talk about the plane, like Euclid's plane, where we don't have coordinates, because there's a lot of math that is simpler when we don't have to consider the location. If we have to make the location match the measurements, that's a whole other level of complexity, which is why when we look at the triangles here, we're looking at some that are not on a grid and some that are on a grid, and we're looking at different information about each one. So that's just a picture of where we're going. And you can see here that our younger students, our narrower domains, are a little bit more broadly preparing for that analysis of a triangle. On day 3, we would be looking at our I-cubed Memoria and arrangement page. And this week we're talking about attending. Because so much of our arrangement on this page is using tables, a great way to attend to a table is just to read the column and row headings, right? What does each column contain? What is each row about, right? And so reading those column and row headings and helping our students to recognize how to use a table is a great attending skill. As our students become more familiar with reading tables, we can start to say, well, what are some patterns in the table? Are there repeated elements that are in this table? This table happens to have a lot of repeated elements because we see that the sum of the exterior angles is 360 degrees for every polygon. We see that when we look at triangles, their perimeter and area formulas are the same. It doesn't matter what kind of triangle we have. And so recognizing those patterns, those repeated elements is going to tell us something and help us to learn something about the content that's here. Again, the goal isn't to learn about the content, but to practice these skills. This is how we can practice attending, is by looking for these things. As we do that, our students will learn, but remember that the goal is to teach them how to attend well. Another thing that you could ask them is to just describe an image in words. So that may be naming a triangle or saying that a hexagon is a polygon with 6 sides. So asking them to describe those images in words, and then asking them to read formulas. Those are all ways that we can attend, because we have to look closely then at what the image is or the formula is in order to read it. So those are some strategies for practicing attending. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share about attending or arrangement?
This page is one of my favorites just because a lot of the kids are familiar with those shapes, but they haven't seen the middle, the triangles and diagonals column beside it. And so like just attending, like asking them, what is something you've seen before? And they'll say, oh, well, I've seen, the pentagon or the hexagon. But then when they look at the other columns and see the diagonals, they're like, but I haven't seen that before. And then you get to ask them questions like, well, what do you notice? Like, what do you see there? What are the patterns that you see, and that kind of thing. And I think they really enjoy, looking at those, because I don't know that they always enjoy answering those questions. Like, I feel like it's a struggle sometimes to get them to answer. But when it's presented in this way, more like a chart or a table, I think it's just easier for them to do because they're just looking across. So I like the I3 pages just because they're more of like a chart or a table, and it organizes them. I think it's just more pleasing to the eye, I guess is the right way to say it. But my kids seem to enjoy these kind of pages.
I agree with what Babs just said, and I would say that in class one year in Challenge A, I had a student who was not particularly enjoying the math map because she was just used to a different program. It was, her first year doing something very, very different. And sometimes when that's what happens, the student winds up doing it alone, especially if they're a firstborn. And so those kinds of things were happening. But in class, this particular page, we were looking at it and we did exactly what you all were saying, just, okay, well, what pattern do you see? And she kind of just started jotting and looking, and she discovered a pattern. And when we got to the charts, it turned out, I think it was Euler's theorem or formula or something like that. But she felt so like, wow, I discovered the same thing looking at these, that a mathematician who's famous, like this is part of his work. And so I think that was one of the turning points for her, just a moment of, okay, good. So that attending, just giving time to attend really is, I think, important.
That's a great reminder about time. And maybe that's one of the things that we can help parents to see is if you just pick one skill, right? Just pick one skill, but give them time to play with that skill, right? So if we're doing in this page this week is attending, and we're not worrying about naming or memorizing or expressing or storytelling, we're just thinking about attending, we have more time, right, to let our students really attend well. And so that brings us to page 3. Are there questions from the concepts or the topics here on page 3?
Something that Andy said in the chat, and I totally agree with this. She said, I feel that iPages are more approachable than the chart sometimes. So it's kind of like when we were in Essentials and there was chart C or there was chart A or whatever. And then there was like AA and BB and CC. I remember making my kids do like chart A, right, and chart C, but I don't know that we ever memorized or I made them copy a million times like AA or BB. Maybe once or twice, but every day they did chart A because I wanted them to memorize that first. So I agree. I feel like it is more of a gentle introduction to more, more that's to come. So,
Well, and that was the intent, right? Is that's why we say we're going to practice our core habits and our common topics. We're going to practice engaging with a reference page that is a little less dense, perhaps a little bit more cohesive in some ways. And we're going to practice with this less dense page. We're going to practice these skills of learning to prepare us to look at a reference page like the charts, right? To prepare us, we know whatever strand you're looking at, that there are reference pages that can feel really overwhelming, right? Whether you go and look at logic or you look at exposition where you have all of your different elements of style listed, or right, that those reference pages can feel overwhelming, and our natural tendency may be a little bit more to shut down and not engage. So the goal of these iPages is to help students to feel like they have the skills to go and engage with these reference pages that may feel a little bit overwhelming.
and
And
even
the parents
practically,
too.
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and give the parents a little bit of step up into the charts, because there have been concepts where I'm like, oh, I think I understand it. And then I look at the chart and I'm like, oh, now I really get it. Because you can take that deeper dive if you want to, if you're willing to.
I think practically too, and this is just because I'm at Direct Challenge A. Sometimes the parents have taken out the charts, which I've already told them I don't like them to do that. But sometimes they take out the charts and they put them in a binder, and then the parent might have the binder and not the kid. And so it really does, though, force us to look more closely at the iPages, because they haven't been removed, right? They're stuck in that book unless they tear the book apart. And so I think that's one thing that kind of helps us with the kids in class, is that everybody has the iPages, right? Because they're attached to their book. Their parent didn't already pull out the chart. And so, that's where we can spend more of our time, and it is more familiar. So.
All right, so day 4 brings us to careful calculations. And one way that you could use your careful calculations is to go beyond just the calculation and ask your student to look at the page and say, well, what do you need to know, right? What is this calculation about? So if you look at these pages, most of these pages, I don't really need to know where they came from. The formula is there, but I'm just substituting in. And so I maybe don't need to know what the formula is even about. But if I wanted to push my children further, I could say, okay, tell me, what is it that this is asking me, right? What is this formula about? What does A and P mean? So you can ask them questions about the content based off of what they're being asked to do on the careful calculations pages. And then another way that you can go beyond the calculations is to ask if-then questions. Right? So for example, here where I have perimeter and area, if I said, well, if one of my sides was longer, what happens to my perimeter? Right? If my height was bigger, what would happen to my area? For older students, you could really challenge them and say, well, right, how small could I make this side and it's still a triangle? How big could I make this other side and it still be a triangle? How small could I make my base and how big could I make my height before it might not be a triangle? Is there a limit on that one? Right, so asking them those if-then questions. What if one value changes? What happens to my result? Or you can say, if I changed my units, right? So here we see meters and feet and inches and yards. Well, what happens if my base was given in feet, but my height was given in inches? What would I need to do, right? So asking them those questions, what if this happened, what would change here, are things that would give you a way to take that careful calculations page and go farther, challenge your student. And then day 4, you see here that we're continuing to look and see the similarities in these pages as we work through this. Are there any questions?
Is there a reason why in fractions it just says diagonal and then in monomials it says diagonal length? Does that matter?
I think that's a really good question. Probably when we say diagonal, we're usually meaning the actual segment itself, where when we're calculating it, we're usually using the length of the diagonal. So that would be a little bit more precise to mean that we're talking about the measure. With the younger students, we're seeing maybe a little less precision there. But when we put the two pieces together, we see how it works. C is a length, right? It's the length of the diagonal. So I think it's just where Lee had room based off of the font size to fit different words.
That makes sense. Just using that tool of comparison, right? One has the word length and one does not. So
All right. So just a reminder of our support that we have, and what I did this week is I sort of put the rest of the year on here so that you could see what we'll be doing as we wrap up this quarter. So we have 2 weeks left in October. We'll be doing lessons 13 and 14. In November, we'll look at lessons 15, 16, and 17. November the 26th is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so we won't be meeting. Then we won't meet on Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve either. So I think that leaves us with about 3 weeks in December that we will be doing question and answer weeks. So we won't keep going ahead and get so far ahead for those that are coming in each week and watching so that they're prepared. We'll wait and pick up with lesson 18 in the new year. And then we'll just use those book club days in December for some Q&A. So we'll show up and we'll answer whatever questions that you have, but we won't have a sort of a formal plan for those weeks. And so as always, we like to end with a time for questions. So if anybody's brought any questions, we are happy to answer those here. And if not, then we will look forward to seeing you all next week.
I have a couple of questions this week. So I'm working in the complex domain, and I'm looking, let's see, week 7, page 3. Let's see. So the big square on the bottom half of that page under where it says exponentiation, in that left hand column where it says whole or broken, what does it mean by the broken? Is that when it's the fraction?
Yeah,
Okay.
that is Lee's term that she likes to use for fraction.
Okay,
Right.
good
That
to
a number
know.
can either be a whole number or a broken number, and she just means that it's a fraction.
Okay, that's helpful. I have one other question. Let's see. In booklet week 6, going back, again on page 3, and it is the bottom right corner at the bottom of that box where it has the LCM of 3, 4, 6. For the LCDs, how is 2/6 chosen as the fraction? And I just might be overthinking it, but I could not understand that part.
Are you in this week's book? I mean, this
Sorry,
year's,
it is this year's book.
then it's page 3.
I think so.
Oh, I mean, it would help if I was in the right booklet. I flipped in it, must have flipped a booklet. I thought I
There it is.
6, but it was thank you, because yeah, I was in
Yeah,
booklet.
that's it. Thank you.
I've been putting it on the screen, but I guess my internet is slower and it like doesn't upload or something. I had the other one on the screen and it never showed up. So
Oh, that's it. That's awesome, Babs. Thank you.
So,
I could not follow the fractions on this one.
yeah, I think that might be a typo because that should be 1/6.
Okay, I kept like doing, I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
two six.
that should be one, that should
Okay,
be 1/6.
okay. I don't know if that was in I'll check and see if it was on the errata or not. It might not have been, but I'll double check.
If
That
not,
helps.
Mr. Babs will send that over.
Okay, thank you so much.
Oh man, I thought we were gonna get to like actually do fun math, not just find typos.
I don't see it in the errata, so I'll send it over.
Thank you. Well, of course, as always, thank you all for being here. Your participation really adds so much. For those that are watching, I really want to emphasize that um, the moms and dads, if they ever show up, but the people that are here on the book club, they're not here by invitation. They're not here um, because they're math whizzes. They're not here because they really know the math. They're just here because they want to participate in the conversation. And some of them have been coming now for multiple years. and have grown and are asking harder questions than they did 2 or 3 years ago because it's becoming more familiar. So I just want to put this appeal out to you that if you're watching this as a recording and you think you don't belong here live, you do. Everybody is welcome to join us live. This is not by invitation. This is not handpicked people are here because they're special. They're special because they're here. But I think that they would all agree that they are truly lead learners. I am a lead learner. I'm learning as I work through developing the math map. So really, I want to just really emphasize that everybody's welcome. And so if you're watching this recording and you've been curious about joining us live, please come. We'd love to have you.
And there's
see you all
no
next
such
week.
thing as a dumb question either.
No. Maybe the one you don't ask.
All right. If there's no other questions, I'll close out the call. You guys have a great week.
You too.
Thanks.